If you're going to play poker, then at some point you're going to find yourself heads up. That is when there are only two players left at a table. Playing one-on-one with an opponent is much more about situation and psychology than it is about the cards you hold. Your job in Heads Up is to disguise what cards you have by the way you play, while doing your best to figure out what your opponent has. Going heads up can be a scary situation, and it is certainly not for the faint-hearted. But then why are you playing if not to get to heads up and win? Assess your cards, be bold, and raise early if you think you've got any sort of hand.
When you get heads up, you need to play much more aggressively than you might have done earlier in a tournament. If you're normally a tight or passive player, then you're going to have to change gears when it comes to heads up, otherwise you'll get run over. You'll need to play hands that you wouldn't have dreamed of playing, even with 4 people at the table, because smaller hands have a much higher value when there are only 2 players left. In Heads Up, you're also always on either the big or small blind, and as the small blind, you're also on the button, which you can use to your advantage. All-ins are much more frequent in Heads Up, so being able to judge or read the other player is key. Hopefully, by the time you get Heads Up, you'll have worked out a tell or two on your opponent that'll help your decision making. At this stage of the tournament, the blinds will be bigger, so in each heads-up hand you'll be risking more of your stack as a percentage, so expect the betting to be much more aggressive. Remember that as the small blind you are also on the button, so you'll get to bet first before the flop. You could choose to bet to steal the blinds or raise first to put the pressure on your opponent. The added bonus is that as you're on the small blind, your opponent is the big blind, so you'll get to see what your opponent does after the flop before having to make your decision. In heads-up play before the flop, raising with any ace or picture card to build a pot gives you a strong position. And if you get re-raised, the likelihood is you're up against a good hand, so you can let yours go and wait for a better opportunity.
The average hand in heads-up poker is Jack-7 unsuited. Against a single opponent, these 2 cards give you a 50-50 chance of winning. A useful place to start when considering your first move. If you've got more chips than your opponent, be relentless in keeping the pressure on. But don't be stubborn and weaken your advantage because you weren't tough enough to fold poor hands. Recognise too that if your opponent has more than 3 times the chips you have, then you're in a tricky position. Your opponent is likely to put you under great pressure in the knowledge that even if you win the hand and double up, you're still going to be behind in chips. Now that doesn't mean to say that you should give up. Just recognise your position and use it to your advantage by careful hand selection. Remember, there have been countless times when the short stack has fought back from an unlikely position to win. Practice your heads-up play as often as possible. That way, when you're one-on-one at the final table, you'll have some experience to fall back on.